everybody. Welcome to Professor Carlos Amorales' lecture, How to Wear a Mask. Before we begin, I would just like to remind everybody that we will be having a Q&A, a question and answer session at the end of Professor Amorales' talk. The way to get the questions through is via the Zoom chat for those of you who are joining us via Zoom. For everyone who is coming in through Facebook, if you could pose your questions, please, in the comments section of the feed. That would be fantastic. And without any further delay, I would like to welcome Dean Christopher Finsk, who will introduce Professor Amorales.
Thank you, Gabriel. And well, thank you, Gabriel, for the technical support here. And I also, there is another Gabriel who's actually behind me. And then there is Nemanja Mitrovic, who's helped make all of this possible. So thanks to the team for this support. It's an immense pleasure for me to introduce Carlos Amorales. I'm not going to make a formal introduction. I just want to say how happy I am that Carlos is teaching with us now for a third year. If my counting is correct, a third year. He will be joining us in our online session in the month of August. And I do want to be sure that everyone knows that it will be possible to participate in this seminar. One can, of course, sign up for a course in a degree program, MA or PhD, but it is also possible to audit seminars this summer. This is the first time that we've been able to make our courses public. And I think the price is very reasonable. And if you are interested in this, if you're interested in joining Carlos or any of the other very distinguished faculty that we have in our summer session, take a look at our webpage under the news section, and you will find there an avenue to register for the auditing option. You can also sign up there for a degree program if you are so moved. I am just delighted that Carlos teaches with us because he's a man of incredible creativity, and that creativity just doesn't stop. And I love that. And I love I just love the fact that he brings this to our students and to our community. It's I always feel that slight mystification one feels when one is in front of creativity. You know, you understand a certain amount. There's a certain obscurity. You realize something's happening here, and I feel that always with Carlos. So I'm going to let him share that with you now and step aside. Carlos, thank you very much for joining us, and especially with this very timely work on the mask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. So welcome everybody. I'm now in Mexico City, and I wrote a text for you that I will read you. And I will start. I will open this lecture by reading a couple of paragraphs about the consequences of the piste in society, written 90 years ago by Antonin Artaud in The Theater and its Double. Once the plague is established in a city, the regular forms collapse. There is no maintenance of roads and sewers, no army, no police, no municipal administration. Pyres are lit at random to wound the dead, with whatever means are available. Each family wants to have its own. Then wood, space, and flame itself growing rare, there are family feuds around the pyres, soon followed by a general flight, or for the corpses are too numerous. The dregs of the population, apparently immunized by their frenzied greed, enter the open houses and pillage riches they know will serve no purpose or profit. And at the same moment, the theater is born. The theater, this is to say, an immediate gratuitousness provoking acts without use or profit. The last of the living are in a frenzy. The obedient and virtuous son kills his father. The chaste man performs sodomy upon his neighbors. The lecher becomes pure. The miser throws his gold in handfuls out of the window. The warrior hero sets fire to the city he once risked his life to save. The dandy decks himself out in his finest clothes and promenades before the charnel houses. Neither the idea of an absence of sanctions nor that of imminent death suffices to motivate acts so gratuitously absurd on the part of men who did not believe that could end anything. And how explains the surge of erotic fever among the recovered victims who, instead of fleeing the city, remain where they are, trying to wrench a criminal pleasure from dying or even the dead, from the dying or even the dead, half crushed under the pile of corpse where chance has lodged them. These days, I often find myself staring out of the windows from my studio into the passing day, hearing previously unheard bird songs mixed with the joyful cries of the children playing in the building courtyard. I fantasize that perhaps what is happening is something like a hoax, a contemporary version of the exterminating angel, to keep the bourgeois people at home while the working classes are out enjoying the city. In Mexico, half of the population works in the formal sector of the economy and earns a living on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, the lockdown can be as rigorous as it seems it was in European countries. It is not that people don't know or believe in the existence of the virus, or that they aren't afraid, but most people just simply have no choice but to continue working outside, selling street food, making music for the passerby, cleaning car windows at the stoplights, but also tending outdoor markets, picking up garbage and sweeping the sidewalks. In Mexico City, despite the government recommendations to the citizens to stay at home in lockdown, there is a life out there still going on in the city. It has become a diminished city, between 50 and 70% of what normally is. But there is a street life going on besides the running ambulances that cross the avenues at high speed, grim reminders of the invisible battle unfolding every day and every night in the hospitals. I stare out of my window into an invisible batters of numbers and fading sirens, but also into a world of women and men who work every day to keep markets assorted, to keep the water running in the taps, light bulbs lighting the darkness, and above all, those who take care of the sick and the dead. And also those informal workers who run the essential services, like selling food and cleaning the garbage, because they are the people that we need in order to survive, as they need the street to strive. Either formal or informal, there is a busy crowd of workers outside. We're crossing through the most dangerous moment in the curve, as the official statistics reveal. But this most dangerous moment in the curve keeps becoming more and more extended. And after many weeks, it seems like it will stay as a plateau. In Mexico City, we have no clear perspective when the pandemic will curve down. 15 weeks ago, when rumors about the lockdown began to circulate, I had a long meeting in the studio with my assistants about the situation, and we decided that everyone will have to go home. Probably, like many other artists, I first had the fantasy that being in isolation would be ideal for making a great artwork. But not long after I began drawing, I seriously asked myself about the point to make art these days. I thought one must be practical. Resulting from that long World Health Organization discussion about if face masks were suited to protect people from becoming infected or not, it suddenly made sense to manufacture face masks for those who can't stay locked at home, but who have to work during these deadly weeks. I proposed to Janet Martinez, the studio manager, the idea to produce face masks with her family cloth-making sweatshop. I approached my Mexican galleries with the idea and proposed them to join the project by convincing some of the gallery collectors to support the production. They agreed and became closely involved in what became a very pragmatic task. We are now producing 3,500 face masks per week, and we have been doing it for 10 weeks, which are distributed by an international NGO called WIEGO, Women in Informal Employment, Globalized and Organized, among thousands of informal workers who range a wide population, including street musicians, sex workers, shoe cleaners, market tenants, and voluntary cleaning services. By simply using WhatsApp, we have organized and structured a distribution system that spreads the face mask through the city via a network of contacts. It is a solidarity production chain involving people belonging to all different social strata. The project was titled in a very matter-of-fact way, the manufacture of reusable fabric face masks for the workers of informal economies in Mexico City. I'm gonna show you some images. So I hope I'm not too clumsy, but now I can see. So here I'm showing a bit the process. So it really goes from buying the fabric, which at the beginning was not that easy because it was very scarce and everybody was kind of in a panic in closing the city. So first we had to find how to get the fabric, then bring it to a place where they cut it and they prepare like little squares, 20 by 20 centimeters more or less. That then we sent to 4 different workshops where they start sewing them and putting the elastic bands on them, and then we package them. This is one of the workshops. And this is kind of like what the product becomes. And then we send actually like 3,500, so that makes 3 big boxes that we send to a union, to a special place. And from there, we make the first step in the distribution. And then somebody brings them to the different people. The first delivery, I'm gonna get out. I think it's nicer. Oh, okay. The first delivery of 2,500 face masks was given in April 20 at the Shoe Cleaners Union in the historical center of Mexico City. From this place, the face masks were distributed to a mixed crowd of street photographers, craftsmen and mechanic organ grinders, street musicians, and of course, shoe cleaners. The second and third delivery was given to public cleaning service providers. The point of distribution was at their union in Iztapalapa district, the most affected by the virus municipality in Mexico City. From the 4th week until now, all deliveries of face masks have been distributed to more than 30 unions and organizations of street market vendors, mostly in low-income neighborhoods. I'm gonna show also. So this is the Street Shoe Cleaners Union. This was the first day we distribute. And here you see when they are distributing it in the streets. This is in Plaza Garibaldi, which is a very known plaza in Mexico because where normally all the mariachis play their music. So perhaps the man in the wheelchair is a mariachi. And these are the organ grinders, which are very ubiquitous in Mexico City. They're very noisy. You see them, they've been here, I think, for at least 100 years. These are also organ grinders, but just not dressed. Craftsmen, also craftsmen people, they're attending, they're looking for some subsidy. They're outside of one of the, how do you say, the work secretaries or work in Mexico. And here you also have street cleaners, like garbage men. And then also very important, and where we mostly distribute, was in the market. In the street markets in Mexico, we have a very strong culture of street markets. They appear once a week, twice a week, and they are moving around the city. And here you can also see how they start, that the face mask is not enough protection, but you start to see that they also start to wrap plastics around. And I think, you know, this has been happening through the last weeks, you start to see more radical forms of wrapping, of protecting, which gives me a feeling of how the intensity of the epidemic is growing. Like here you can see how really becomes almost like a window or like a shield, like a plastic shield, which in a way become also very beautiful pictures, I would say. In 10 weeks, 35,000 face masks have been produced and given to 11,615 informal workers. We give 3 reusable face masks to each person. The production of face masks is made by 5 student workshops that together form a sort of decentralized factory located in the greater metropolitan area of the city. This initiative is giving work to 17 families during these tough times of health crisis, economic disaster, and unemployment. Everyone these days, wealthy or poor, is worried about the economy. People are psychologically stressed. Asking money for socially oriented initiatives to the Mexican government is senseless. Asking wealthy people is not an easy task. After some weeks of fundraising, I decided to make the initiative self-sufficient and generate the necessary money to keep the production of face masks happening. First, I decided to propose face masks to some museums for their visitors, so with their earnings, I will produce more red ones. For instance, I made face masks with a printed black moth for the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, where I was having an exhibition. This strategy worked out well, but is limited since each museum has its own policy towards the face mask. For instance, in Mexico, museums are still closed. I decided to invest the gains from the museum's reductions to make face masks with printed motifs and openly sell them from my studio to everyone interested in buying them. For advertising the face mask with a black moth, I asked the youngsters from the student workshops to dress up as when they go partying and model them in the street outside in plain daylight. Meanwhile, their older relatives work in the production. I like how during the photo shoot, the youngsters decide to jump as if the black butterflies was flying freely. I like how in these pictures, they represent their sense of freedom, perhaps a stereotyped freedom, but still freedom. During this lockdown, sorry. Oh. I think I missed some of the images. I'm sorry. These are the images in the museum. These are the masks produced for the museum, so they have the logo of the museum. And these are the ones I made later without logo that I'm selling from my studio, and which I was mentioning that I made like a fashion shoot with the youngsters from the factories. Sorry. During this lockdown, freedom has become a very important value. I take the freedom to produce and give face masks for free to the informal workers of Mexico City. No one is forcing me. No one is expecting it. I'm not doing nobody's job, nor I'm earning money from it, but I'm earning my freedom. I only took one aesthetic decision for the production of the face mask for informal workers, choosing them to be red. The choice for this color wasn't an arbitrary preference dictated by my taste. I had to think of a color for face mask that will be distinctive from the ones that doctors and health personnel use. So there will be no confusion about them, meaning that these cotton red face masks aren't as protective as N95 masks. And since these ones became so scarce and must be used in hospitals, we wouldn't give the idea that we were hoarding them. There were economic reasons as well for choosing to use just one plain color for making the face mask distinctive in the streets, since printing an image on them will double the expenses and it was necessary to produce as many as possible with the money that had been donated. Besides such practical concerns, I took the freedom to make an aesthetic reference to the film Dead Ringers by David Cronenberg from 1988, in which he dresses the twin surgeons who are the main characters and their crew at the operating room in full red medical clothing, including the face mask that they wear. Cronenberg explains in an interview that he chose the medical clothing to be red because this is a complementary color of green, and since green is normally used to clearly spot bloodstains in the clothing while conducting an operation, he decided to twist the pragmatic logic. Such perverted rationality introduces a feeling of uncanniness in his films, where, for instance, he duplicates Jeremy Irons, the main actor, to perform the twin brothers, gynecologists, who play with their own identical identities to confuse their patient, a woman who is unaware that there are two of them treating her instead of one doctor. What would be taken as a primitive film trick becomes a refined device for confusing us, the film's audience, and induce us to think about multiplicity in the frame of a mise and a beam, a formal technique of placing a copy of an image within itself, in a way that suggests an infinitely recurring sequence, the thing in itself, in itself, in itself. Oops, sorry. Something extraordinary about the manufacture of reusable fabric face masks for the workers of informal economies in Mexico City is that it all has been happening meanwhile I've been staying at home. Since the masks are produced and distributed in the city and I cannot be present in person, I asked those who receive them to send me pictures by phone. In the last weeks, I have been receiving more than 2,000 photographs from people that I don't know, wearing the red face mask. This collection has become a window to look into an unfair world that has become too dangerous to inhabit, a world that we knew was unequal, but that perhaps never deeply realized how terrible it really is. I look at the pictures and see the vulnerability of the people portrayed, like First World War soldiers posing in front of a photographer before running into no man's land. I can't help thinking that perhaps once the pandemic passes, some of them might not be alive. And indeed, to this day, 40 of them, garbage collectors, are recording their union Facebook page to have died from the disease. I witness the situation that is happening outside through these photographs. I'm seeing people who aren't soldiers fighting in a battle against an invisible enemy, but ordinary citizens wearing red face masks. I'm locked inside my studio. I'm someone trapped inside a world that is trapped inside the outside world, like in a mise en abîme. As I'm reading these sentences to you, I see a portrait of myself in the upper left side of my screen. These days of endless video meetings and suffering from digital fatigue, we see ourselves as we talk to the others or listen to them, immersed in a closed circuit of egos reflecting on each other. Never before, the consciousness of our own image as we speak has been so totalitarian and at the same time so banal. 15 weeks ago, what 15 weeks ago started as an initiative to engage practically with society in pandemic times, slowly but thoroughly became a massive flow of photographic images of people wearing red face masks in some of the most ordinary situations in the city. The street market, the recollection of garbage, and the sweeping of streets. In this picture, I've seen places that I didn't know existed or that I never dreamt of seeing, as for instance, the places where garbage collectors gather when they start their jobs at dawn, in areas of the city that are out of my reach. I've seen the people who inhabit these places and how they look like when they labor. I can't judge if they lead a good or a bad life, if they are the victims of an unfair political system, or if they are enjoying it. They just seem to inhabit reality, and I miss it. In the last weeks, I received amateur photographs of people whose faces I can see because they are wearing red face masks. In some photographs, I can see the distribution process. Sometimes, it seems like the action of giving the mask has been performed for the camera as a proof that the face masks were actually given for free. In other pictures, we only see people portrayed in their job position, simply staring at the camera like in a traditional portrait. Other times, they give us some thumbs up as to say thank you, or they are portrayed in the moment of putting the mask. These photographs showing the distribution of red face masks are moments in a timeline. Seeing one picture after another in the telephone gives me the feeling of witnessing reality from a distanced point of view, like watching a jump cut film. Altogether, the images form a stream of moments like a parallel curve, a plateau of ordinary events that have been upset by the pandemic. As I said, when it all started, I was questioning the sense to make art these days. It felt like something superficial to do. I felt that one had to be strictly practical, so I found no pertinence in making images. But then these images of workers wearing red face masks inadvertently emerged like a large panorama that makes me conscious of a world that is parallel to mine. If I would print all these photographs and hang them in a chronological order, what will this panorama will tell us? If exhibited, will it be a meaningful art piece? I'm not insinuating that the face mask is an interesting artistic surface in aesthetic terms, or that giving them to people is an interesting artistic action. I am wondering about the meaning of the photographic panorama that has emerged and how it portrays a masked crowd. What does a masked crowd want? Structuring a discourse about wearing masks in social situations became central in my artistic practice since the mid-90s. When I began my career as an artist, the internet started to become part of everyday life. The concept of the avatar was chosen to represent the existence of our personal identity in the virtual space. Avatar, mask, and interface became important words in my practice as I developed the concept of a fictional character that I will lend to other people to perform with. I experimented during 7 years with a wrestling mask, which was made as my portrait. My intention was to lend it to someone else, making a doppelganger of myself as a wrestler who could exist in the professional wrestling world. That is, a world parallel to mine. This year, once the discussion about wearing face masks to avoid contagion began to take a central place in the media, the word mask took a central role. Here are some examples. World Health Organization says there is no need for healthy people to wear face masks. Days after the Center for Disease Control and Prevention told all Americans to cover their faces. World Health Organization issues new guidance on face masks, advising people wear them in places where social distancing is difficult or if you are over 60 years old. World Health Organization advises to wear masks in public areas. World Health Organization finally endorses masks to prevent transmission. Yes, it's time to make masks mandatory. How the face mask became the world's most coveted commodity. Pandemic sparks a war for masks in desperate global scramble for protection. Why are we at war over face masks? US accused of modern piracy after diversion of masks meant for Europe. New pandemic culture war. Some Republicans, like Trump, ditch mask. Trump's war on mask is working, at least with his base. Refusing to wear a mask is an empty act of defiance. The war on mask is yet another battle dividing us. Schwarzenegger. Anyone who politicizes face masks is an absolute moron. These are headlines from some mainstream Anglo-Saxon media, which ignite political discussions that become global. In Mexico, we are not spared from our local version of this discussion about the face mask. Our populist president has refused to wear them, therefore politicizing the issue in a manner that mimics the American. Still, in Mexico, we have an antique history of using masks in rituals, which goes deeper than the American bipartisan discussion, inspiring the figure of the masked outlaw cowboy versus the bare-faced lawful one. In the seminal essay, Labyrinth of Solitude, published in 1950, the Mexican poet Octavio Paz argues in his chapter titled Mexican Mask about the character of the Mexicans that, I quote, whether young or old, criollo or mestizo, general or laborer or lawyer, seems to me to be a person who shuts himself away to protect himself. His face is a mask, and so is his smile. Paz describes this mask as a language of reticences, metaphors, allusions, unfinished phrases, silence full of tints, faults, thunderheads, sudden rainbows, and indecipherable treats. It interests me from Paz that he understands the mask as something immaterial, a language. Oops. Something happened? Okay. A language that is used for building an impenetrable wall of indifference and remoteness between reality and ourselves. In his view, by using an immaterial mask, the Mexican is always remote from the world and from other people, and also from himself. Labyrinth of Solitude is one of the most important texts written about Mexicanity, that is, Mexican national identity. And although it was published 70 years ago, it still describes some important aspects of our personal cultural characteristics, but of course misses all the important economic and socio-political changes that happened in the last decades, such as neoliberalism, globalization, and the advent of the digital world, just to mention a few of the important discussions that shape contemporary thought. In the light of our new isolated life, the possibility of an object that keeps our personal identity remote, protecting it from other people's gaze, it's interesting. Since a mask is a non-personal object, is meant to represent an other and not oneself, in self-thinking masks to describe a particular national identity, as Octavio Paz did, think mask as a non-identity, as a language instead as the representation of a persona. A mask language could be helpful for thinking about how we experience isolation. Heads made of pixels navigating social networks, talking with others through remote conferencing, talking heads. Last year, in an almost frenzied state of inspiration, I wrote a text for the book that I published for the Stedelijk exhibition. I call it The Rhetoric of the Mask. In it, I developed a series of ideas and invented sub-concepts about how Octavio Paz's notion of the material mask can be a language, a mask language. Following, I will read some excerpts from the book. One second. A mask has two sides, an interior side that faces towards the face of the person that is wearing it, and an exterior side that faces toward the person or persons, the others, who are looking at it. The interior side faces the self, the exterior side faces the other. The mask stands in between like a membrane. It is an artifact that hides the self from the gaze of the other. projecting the image of a fantastical character, a mythological figure, a superhero, a blank face, or even the face of another real person. In these cases, the mask represents another being, but a mask can also be idealized and be the idealized representation of the self, or an exterior vision of how one is seen by the other. A mask maker is the person who knows how to craft masks for himself and for other persons. A mask maker makes masks that are simultaneously concrete and conceptual. If someone needs a mask, then he or she will ask the mask maker to make one. But if someone makes a mask, then this person becomes a mask maker. When the mask maker makes a mask, he or she gives it a form and a potential meaning. It is then the wearer who gives the sense to the meaning of the mask. In this way, a mask maker is a sort of magician because it creates an object that holds power. The mask is a tool of power. It is the mask maker who defines whether a mask is a tool of power or just a decorative object or an art piece. When a mask is presented as an art piece, then it's no longer a mask, but a reference to it. As such, the public views it from a distance, as if it is something that happened elsewhere, or as a testimony from the past. In this sense, the power of the mask becomes neutralized and can only regain its agency when it's worn again. This means that a mask is powerless when presented as art. But since a mask also exists in a conceptual sense, mask language, rather than the mask itself, can still affect the social situation. Mask language can be introduced in the language of art if it formally becomes an art piece. Thus, the mask maker is no longer a magician, but an artist. A mask portraying a fictional character allows the person who wears it to embody the power of fiction. A mask portraying the face of another person allows the person who wears it to embody the power of that person. A mask portraying a neutral face allows the person who wears it to embody the power of neutrality. A mask portraying the face of the wearer, it allows the wearer to embody its own power. Such a mask allows the wearer to show a feeling on the outside that is different than what the wearer feels in the inside. The wearer can show happiness when feeling sad and vice versa. To wear a mask of our own face allows to be hypocritical. To make a mask of the self and give it to others is a way to distance ourselves from itself, so one can see oneself interacting in a situation with others. As well, to make a mask of oneself is an act of branding the self. The public persona of a pop star or a politician is a mask of branding. It is the face that appears in the media, which hides its face behind the mask. Public personas are masks that become multiplied by the media. Public persona masks are needed by private persons for occupying the social space of the internet. Occupying the space of social media in the internet has become the ultimate space of self-colonization. Public personas occupy such space by letting their mask be multiplied by the media. Private persons make a mask of their own, which allows them to be hypocritical. One can give a mask depicting one's own face to another person to enable them to perform something that we don't want to do or are unable to do. In this case, giving a mask of oneself to another person is not an act of hypocrisy. Giving a mask of oneself to another person is an act of self-duplication. Self-duplication is an act of unfolding. Self-duplication is power. This mask power can be duplicated and multiplied to let others represent oneself in multiple places at the same time. The active interaction of masked individuals and masked organizations in politics for the purpose of interfering in the social field is the game of mask. The game of mask is politics. It is the strategy for achieving one's own goals by deceiving the other. It is the game played to impose the I above the them. The I can also become the we, because the I is the self in the family, the school, the friend, the guild, the notion, the union, the party, the government, the state, the country, the nation, and every other form of collective organization, real or virtual, that the I belongs to. These organizations are in opposition to those conformed by others. The game of mask is the power game that everyone plays to attain wealth or survive. A mass group is perhaps the most radical form of impersonality. It's the force of the collective expressed as a unitary identity leading to action. There are groups which mask themselves with literal masks. Others mask themselves with virtual identities. Yet other groups pretend to be something they are not. These are hypocritical masked groups. In face of natural catastrophes, a political movement might decide to wear a mask as a collective. Anonymity is perhaps the most powerful political tool that an insurgent movement can use against the state. Mass groups can also belong to the state. In either case, they produce fascination, and if armed, fear. Defiant masked groups appear both in the real world and in the virtual world. In some cases, they operate in only one of the two spaces, but in others, they operate simultaneously in both. Unmasking reveals what lies behind the mask, but as this is a liminal layer, it also reveals what stands in front of it. Unmasking is paradoxical because the act reveals the truth behind the mask by revealing the truth about oneself. Unmasking is necessary in a binary world because the tension between opposites constitutes the basic logic for understanding that world. But in a future unitary world where distinguishing opposite is no longer needed, the act of unmasking will become useless. Thus, in the new way of being, unmasking the fusion world that is becoming only reveals that oneself is the fusion world. Since our sense of reality has been disrupted, a masked language could be used for speaking from our place of isolation or home. I want to imagine and purpose a language of the mask. It is a typeface of emoticon-like symbols that can be used to write phrases with concepts about the mask as a coded language. Masked language is expressed through the following symbols representing concepts. This. The rhetoric of the mask explains its concept and its symbol. By unfolding the meaning of each symbol listed above, it becomes a reflection on how masks operate in a contemporary society. Masked language rhetoric is written by using these 41 emoticons. It is an emoticon writing system that can be combined for deciphering and synthesizing rhetorical situations in the universe of masks. In this way, for example, means that the internet itself is not equal to the universe of masks, but is contained in this universe. As a rhetoric, its function is to persuade others to acknowledge the existence of the mask as something that is differentiated from identity. So the game of mask can be played instead of the identity game. The rhetoric of the mask operates with the following 41 concepts. The universe of mask, the self, the primal self, the internet primal mask. I'm just gonna read a few: the mask choir, the mask, the two sides of the mask, the power of the mask, the game of mask, the hypocritical mask, the society of mask, true politics, the Janus mask, the mask looking at itself, the masked carnival group, and so on. I have organized the mask symbol inside the structure of a font editor program for designing typefaces in a way that they can be typewritten by replacing the normal alphabet of a standard typeface, such as, for instance, Helvetica, Arial, or Times New Roman. In this way, when I type a normal word and build up phrases in any idiom that I know, I can configure and reconfigure the 41 concepts of the masked language in different order, Each time that I produce a new configuration in mask language as a new combination of concepts appears, it's possible to elucidate a new reading of the language. One other action that can be performed with this mask language typeface is to apply it to an existing text, whereas a banal text, as for instance, is a recipe for cooking shrimps in mango sauce, can be transformed into a whole new dimension of meaning. For instance, this is the shrimps in mango sauce recipe. Since the emergence of the disease in a food market in China until the growing chain of infection that is besieging our family and friends, the process of globalization has arrived to a state of interconnection that can be described as a fusion of abstract ciphers with personal names and surnames. After the official lockdown weeks, we have reached a new strange stage that the government calls the new normality, which we are beginning to experience in Mexico as the new way of being. According to news published in an Amazonian region magazine at the end of last March, the Wiwa people from Sierra Nevada in Colombia and Caribe believe that to avoid the disease, its name should not be pronounced. In this light, the name of the new disease transited in only a few weeks from not existing to be coined by the experts of the World Health Organization and then be pronounced by millions of people. To avoid naming the disease, one should use a language of reticences, metaphors, allusions, unfinished phrases, silence full of tints, falls, thunderheads, sudden rainbows, and indecipherable treats. When I see someone in the street wearing the face mask, I cannot help thinking that such person is conscious of the world that names the virus, therefore is protecting itself and others from the illness. The face mask signals the virus word in our consciousness. A 20 by 20 centimeters piece of cloth stitched together with an elastic band is one of the main protective tools to avoid infection. The well-known idea that language is a virus has become real. Everyone wearing a face mask in the street is anonymous. Such is the power of masked people. Masks are uncanny because they make us wonder who the wearer is. The person wearing a mask gains special powers: the power of distance, the power of anonymity, and the power of becoming a fictional character. These three powers combined become the power of the mask. Therefore, the person who wears a mask has power. The distribution of red face masks to form a large crowd of masked people in the streets is part of my artistic practice because it produces an image. The red face mask renders visible what otherwise would remain invisible in this time of pandemic: the outside world and those who operate it. The outside world in the street has become a new space for artists to desire. It is the new underground, the new space to live our erotic fantasies, to dream of dystopic anarchy, the forbidden zone that one must secretly visit for inspiration. What has helped me during confinement to continue working is to think of prohibited spaces, spaces of desire. Just as when I was young, going to criminal underground dance clubs was a desirable and strong experience, what I feel is interesting now is that the street became that. The world outside, the confinement, is what potentially becomes the criminal underground. Obviously, the loud world online in which we are immersed is boring. What exciting thing happens here? Furthermore, we are encouraged to continue using it for everything. I feel that what is interesting now is the street, because it's dangerous, because it's full of people you don't know, because it has become a desirable place. There is even a kind of eroticism in the street, which I am imagining. I'm not saying it is real, but to me, wanting the street in such a way is what has allowed me to carry out the project of the red face mask. Most interesting for me is that I don't go out in the street, nor have I seen what actually happens with the red face mask project, but the images of that forbidden world are what stimulate me. Distributing face masks is undoubtedly helping someone. I have corroborated. But also it has been an effort that stimulates my imagination and generates an image. Let's call it a red crowd, which becomes an evocative literary image. Let's transcribe red crowd into mass language and see how it will read. These emoticons signify the following concept: the invisible mask group, the facial prosthesis, the choir of mask, the actor, the invisible mask group, true politics, unmasking, the choir of mask. Red crowd encodes the following sentences: the invisible mask group, the facial prosthesis, the choir mask, plus the actor, the invisibly masked group, true politics, unmasking, and the choir of masks. If outside is the new underground, then these two sentences mean that once the plague is established in the city, the regular forms collapse. There is no maintenance of roads and sewers, no army, no police, no municipal administration. The obedient and virtuous citizens destroy their democracy. The doctor rapes his unconscious patient. The journalist becomes crooked and publishes invent news. The banker throws his golden handfuls out of the window. The activist destroys the community he once risked his life to save. It is at this point that I feel that the artistic operation becomes important and necessary, equivalent to the passionate need of a writer to write. This is the moment the theater is born. The theater, this is to say, an immediate gratuitousness provoking acts without use or profit. One must go on making art. Not everything has to be pragmatic. Okay, I'm finished.
Thank you very much, Professor Amorales, for that very beautiful lecture. We will now go to our Q&A phase. I would just like to remind everyone, if you have any questions and you're joining us via Facebook, if you want to post them in the comments section, we will then, pose your question to Professor Amorales, and also to those who are in the Zoom meeting. If you want to post them in the chat, we will gladly pose those questions. We would like to begin with a question from Edith Doran. Edith, if you would like to pose your question to Professor Amorales.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Thank you so much for that talk. It was wonderful. You sent me back to many years ago when I worked in a museum that had a fantastic collection of masks from West Africa. And we had to create workshops around it. And the whole question of our own faces being a mask was the central sort of concept for a lot of the programs that we ran. It was a children's museum, by the way.
Right.
The children totally understood that idea.
They connect very
cool. So I guess to go to the question that I almost forgot I gave, but here, of course, in the States, wearing a mask has become such a divisive political issue, and you mentioned that, of course, with the certain politicians, American politicians that you quoted. So I was just wondering what you think of that. Like for me, I just gasp at seeing it. It's watching this pandemic spread through this country. It's supposed to be my country, and I don't. I see us falling on our knees because we don't have a sense of the public anymore. And standing by that word becomes a very politically divisive idea. So the question is like, where is the mask with this? For me, I look at COVID, and the only other disease that is as rampant in the United States is identity politics.
Right.
You know? And so maybe I'm mixing up sort of many issues here, but
I think it's interesting. I mean, I was just thinking that I have to agree with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, of course.
It's becoming stupid. Because, I mean, also here it was a long process.
Yeah.
And at the beginning had a very clear reason why they were not wanting everybody to just go and get masks, because they need them from the hospital. So of course that's very clear and pragmatical, so it makes sense. So once they stop people, because otherwise people will just start to make business out of them.
Right.
But eventually it became more and more evident that it made sense to wear masks, that it's not gonna cure, it's not gonna prevent totally, it's limited, but it's a good aid, let's say, for going in the street or going into places. But in a strange way, also our president, for instance, is the only one from all politicians who has refused to wear a mask in public, as if to wear a mask will mean that he's not telling the truth or something like that he's not trustworthy. I think has to do with something like that. Like, I mean, I think it's ironical because in a way, a politician, since is such a public persona, actually wears a mask.
Yes.
And then they go home or they go to the toilet and they're back to themselves. And then they come back because there is this constant view on them, or this media view.
Yes.
So I also wonder if the idea of wearing a mask over a mask also becomes kind of almost like a fear of neutralizing the mask, or that they will show themselves as maybe too personal, like as if the mask becomes a sort of, I'm just thinking like, but as if the mask almost reveals your vulnerability instead of showing your strength, which is what they want, I guess, to project. So I also guess it has to do with something very cultural. Like in Mexico, it's not that people wear them in the streets, but it's kind of common. There is like I think it's interesting in that sense what Paz says, in the sense of how we internalize the mask and we use it in the way we express ourselves. So let's say the Mexican never tells exactly, like when I compare a Spanish, that you say like, hey, can I go in? And they say no. And that's it, or yes, come in. But the Mexican is like, instead of saying it's not like, maybe, or again,
that membrane.
nuances of not telling, which I hear that also the Japanese have it a bit. So I guess there is also this idea of how you show yourself in public. You're meant to be. You always have to be kind of nice in public. You cannot just be yourself. So I guess it has to do with these things. But indeed, it's a very strange politicization what has happened in the States.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Edith. Thank you, Carlos. We have another question from Sonia Baez Hernandez. Sonia, I don't know if you want to ask your question to Professor Amorales.
Yes, okay. Hi. Hola.
Hola.
My question is related to, I think that wearing the mask have other meanings now. And then those meanings are related, at least for me, in a sense of dealing with death. And then that if you, like, for example, do not follow those codes or those type of hygienes, and I'm thinking, at least for me, it's a connection to all this reference to the bubonic plague. And then that one have to follow those type of protocols. But then, is this relation to death and then this break of normality. So then for me, I cannot connect to that reference to identity in that way. When I connect to issues of identity, for example, in terms of race, is because then people start to look at me weirdly because I'm wearing this mask. So I think that identity, race don't disappear in the same ways that class do not disappear, because then they have the elements then that they're wearing the masks in the market or in the workplace, but when they go to their house, it's no social distance. And then I think that we have to distinguish that the symbolic is different for people then that they're poor and then don't have the access. And then that somehow, for example, here in Florida, I live in homesteading where they have a lot of farm. The people that work as a farmer's workers, they don't use masks when they're collecting the crop. And then they don't wear masks when they are being transferred from place to place. Yeah. And then when they go to their house, they don't have no social distance. And I think that for me, it's a different type of experience in where, yes, we could come here to our house, then we're reading, we're doing this, do that. And then for them, it's not the same. They have to be in the same struggle, same everyday struggle. And then, for me is that the practice of doing the mask, it make reference to freedom, but also it make reference to a responsibility toward the other. And then it make reference also in a way to a policy that's still determining who live and die. Right. And I think that those policies are larger than that traditional politics and that appear in those type of masks that you represent. And for me, at least, artists is also in here in Florida, which would be an interested, and I think that globally, the artist community responded by basically creating a mask, creating objects, for example, to be used by scientists. And I think it make reference to that they have this kind of responsibility and then this type of connections to how could we contribute to resolve problems in society that is beyond the traditional type of circulations of commodities, and that we're willing to basically to give things and try to make it in different ways, like getting donations that you did. So I think that aspect need to describe also globally in that sense, because I have some of my friends artists and they, that was what they did. I got different masks from different people because then they were concerned about it. But I think that I love what you do, but I think that those connections, at least for me, are important in terms of the work.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you made me think because, in the case, for instance, with the people who are selling food in the street market, because I managed the way to, I really question them, like it makes sense to give them masks because maybe it makes sense to me and to everybody thinks it's fantastic, but for them, what's in reality? And so I had to make this question, and I did it through this person from the NGO who knows them. And their answers were very interesting. Like in the case of the garbage collectors, it was nice to get it, but for them, what they really need is so much more protection. They need shields, they need really suits, like they're really dealing with very toxic things. So for them was like giving them a little candy, so it was great, but that was it. And then for the street market people, the reaction was actually much more political because it helps them, of course, to have the mask. That's something good. But the problem with them is that the government was only allowing them to sell their goods in the street if they were masked, but they were not given masks by the government. So it became one of these strange situations where it sounds really great, like, yeah, you can do it, but It is obligatory you have a face mask. But then how? And you know, a lot, it's not that easy to buy them. They cost money, and some are even selling them, you know, because that's how precarious it is now. So to give them the mask beyond just protecting themselves, what became important was that allow them to work in the street. And that I never figured before. And to me was, well, that's really interesting because that really puts this into other kind of discussions. Then there was also an interesting thing happening with the organ grinders. I don't know if that's the name in English, but the guys who play this mechanical piano, because they're very visible and we all know them. And they're very traditional and you always see them in the street. So what happens is like a lot of TV shows start to film them to make little clips and talk about their situation, sometimes to support them or talk about the pandemic. And they were wearing the red mask. So in a very funny way, somehow it infiltrated in the television, of course, anonymously, because nobody's mentioning that what they're for, but there you could see. So I think there are different ways that the mask also circulate. And I think that's very interesting. And I think it's also, I mean, of course, there are traditions that each culture has, you know, and also I think for American cowboys, you know, it's more like the billions wearing the, you know, the bandana here. But for maybe in Mexico, it relates to like the original cultures, you know, so it really has like different ways of reading. And I think that's interesting because I think it's a moment where we can propose new readings, or we can think about new readings, about what could be this. Of course, bipartisan reading is a bit maybe too much, it's a bit too tough, but it feels limited. But I guess there is also many other ways to open up.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you, Sonia. We have another question, Carlos, from Armando Garma Fernandez. Armando, if you would like to pose your question to Professor Amorales.
Yeah, thank you. I actually asked several, so I don't even know which one you're referring to anymore.
Whichever you want.
Well, some of my questions have already been addressed by others. For me, I guess the biggest thing would be just graphically, that image you showed of I guess you said it was a moth, the moth butterfly on the mask. It makes such a stylized X on the face of the wearer. I was just wondering, I'm probably just projecting onto this, if there's any connection between that aesthetic choice and the Nahuatl word for face, which actually begins with an X.
Right.
Hayatl, Hayacatl.
Right. I didn't thought about it like that. Actually, I was connecting it more to the poster of Silence of the Lambs. And that became, because I was thinking maybe to use more like inspiration from certain films or things that are like in pop culture, but that are kind of buried or we don't know anymore. Yeah. But it's interesting the connection you make to the Nahuatl. I mean, that moth comes from a piece that I made some years ago, which is this plague of black moths made of paper that I installed in different places. So I just took one per face. So I was kind of imagining like, okay, imagine you have 1,000 people with all these different moths. It becomes again, like, you say like, it becomes this bunch of butterflies, this almost like a plague of butterflies. The thing with this image is that it also has a very strong connotation with death, at least in Mexico. I guess in other countries too. Like when we see black butterflies or the night butterflies or night moths, at least here there is this superstition where somebody's gonna die. So it has also this ambiguity, but on the other hand also has something beautiful and elegant, if you wish. But yeah, I mean, this I just made recently, so I'm still kind of gathering experiences from people. So it's very helpful that you make me look at the face of in the Nahuatl.
It's interesting that you brought up the Silence of the Lambs. I wasn't thinking that. I was perhaps thinking that it also looked like, I don't know if you've seen it, the Watchmen series that came out recently on HBO. There's a character called Rorschach that looks very much like that mask as well.
Okay.
Yeah. But thank you very much for answering my question. I'm happy to see that you're helping the the less affluent in Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Armando. I think we have time for one last question, Carlos. And, you know, I want to obviously say to everyone, we're sorry that we can't take all of your questions. We would love to keep talking and have, you know, an entire day for this maybe in the future. But we will go now to Catherine Everett, who has a question for you, Carlos. Catherine, would you like to ask Professor Amorales?
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for such a great talk. And I'm speaking to you through the mask of myself, you know, the image that is projected here, but aren't we all, right? I was so interested when you talked about the street as an increasingly political space with the advent of masks. And in the United States and around the world, we're seeing so many anti-systemic protests that are, I mean, reimagining the security apparatus really broadly. And to see the pandemic as backdrop to this seems like there has to be some sort of connection, right, between masks, the pandemic, and these increasingly imaginative protests. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that and if you see connections there yourself.
I mean, I'll try, because I also wonder if one thing led to the other, or it was a reaction to it beyond, let's say, the actual facts, or like what's going on, like why we're needing to use the space. So I had to, the outside space. And for me was like a thought that came kind of very much in the beginning, when, let's say, the lockdown was more strict, or let's say we were more afraid. So, because now what is happening here is that we're starting to venture outside a little bit, and we're starting to do certain things. And then we realize that it's almost a normality outside, which is kind of really scary because the pandemic is still there. So we have, I think things have changed, but let's say we've been locked for almost 4 months, kind of, you know, it's been a really long process. So for me, it became much more like an imaginary space, like perhaps, you know, like, it's not that these things I was describing are actually happening, you know, it's not that it's so, I mean, right in the beginning, I almost imagined something like what Artaud describes in the text that I read in the beginning would happen. And I was really scared. Like I really thought like society in Mexico will collapse. Perhaps it's collapsing, but it's going in a very slow pace. So it's very strange, because when you actually go outside, you realize that the world's still there. It's normal, it's as it used to be, but maybe something is changing. So it's more about trying to figure out the signals of what is happening than, let's say, a radical situation as Artaud describes. But as an artist, what I find interesting is the possibility, because it's something we didn't have anymore, which is, let's say, something called tierra incognita, like, let's say, places that have not been explored, places that are out of our bounds, that we don't know. Like, let's say, before was unconsciousness, or before was evil. You know, it's changing in different moments in art. And I felt more and more that, let's say, art has become so rational and has become so much about certain purposes that we were missing any more those space. Even like virtual space was kind of this space for desire. Maybe 20 years ago, there was all this fantasy. So I start to, you know, I remember there were these moments where people start to dream about making websites and how this will open up things and become new spaces and experimental spaces, etc. And so since this is becoming closer and the city space is becoming smaller or almost non-existent, I start to think like perhaps this outside world, which actually is normality or is the real world, could become interesting again, could become a place for fantasy again. So that's a bit what I'm trying to say in this lecture. Like, it's not so much about what's real, but it's also how one as an artist or as a person can fantasize about reality and make it exciting, interesting, or literary again, you know, can really. On the other hand, the way the world is going on is really interesting too. So that's really the other side.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carlos. And I want to thank everyone who joined us via Zoom, on Facebook as well, you know, for Carlos's talk. And I would like to hand off to Dean Christopher Finsk, who will have some closing remarks. So, Dean Finsk.
Well, nothing lengthy, just a very warm thank you, Carlos. You never disappoint. I have to go back and think about a lot of that and loop it back into some of your previous work with this language and all of this theater dimension you've introduced today. It's been wonderful. I thank you very, very warmly, and look forward to seeing you in about a month in our online set.
I hope.
I will not miss it. So thank you so much, Carlos. And thank you everybody for joining us, and everyone be safe and my best. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Gabriel. Maybe I see you around.
Yeah.